And thanks, St John, for that very kind introduction. As St John mentioned, I grew up in the Waikato. I grew up on a farm in Hoio Tainui, which is about 40 k's northeast of Hamilton. And I think Graham mentioned there's still a bit of connectivity for rural broadband out there, but I am very pleased to report that while my family on farms still complain about the speed of their internet, it's certainly better than it was some time ago. The other thing they moan about a lot, with a lot of justification, I suppose, is also the weight of regulation and compliance, which they and many other farming families, have to live with. I guess the thing is, we're not really alone in this. Our colleagues in the American firm in Deloitte, America, have worked with the Department of Agriculture to show how better connectivity can help on farm, but can also help with communities. So we talk quite a bit about how technology can help people become more productive, more efficient, but we sort of can't lose sight of that people aspect as well. This report is called A Case for Rural Broadband, a focus on agriculture, and it's publicly available on the US Department of Agriculture website. When I read this report, I could have been reading a report about New Zealand. One part particularly stood out for me. Quote, producers face inconsistent ability to tap into and master new technologies, compromising the higher productivity and greater profitability needed to sustain and grow United States agriculture, meet the dietary needs of a growing global population, and maintain national competitiveness in international markets. If you take out the United States and substitute with New Zealand, you've got the exact same issues our farmers are facing. So the report looks really at digital technologies across 3 stages of agricultural management. So it looks at planning, things like, collecting data to help make choices about what, when and where to produce. Production, so things like monitoring growth and monitoring inputs like fertiliser, and market coordination, which is largely about shaping consumer preferences. So in this piece of work, our colleagues in the States, who Lisa and I spoke to last week, they estimated the benefits of connected agricultural technologies to policymakers, industry leaders, and people who are affected by the lack of high-speed internet services across the rural US. And I'm sure, as many of you know, in the States, with their state and federal layers of government, this means that they don't have the simplicity of having one centrally rolled out broadband program. Every state over there is implementing broadband differently, so that depends, there's a lot of variation in terms of how much money is invested in infrastructure, but also what the political priorities are for actually getting good quality internet to rural people. So it's tough. The analysis that our colleagues did looked at about 34 different technologies used for livestock production and also for row and specialty crops. So these spanned things like precision seeding, row harvesting, mastitis detection, and traceability and marketing. What this report showed is that at the upper end, broadband connectivity could realise up to $65 billion in economic benefits to the rural United States. So in order to realise that benefit, that would mean broadband internet infrastructure, digital technologies at scale, and on-farm capabilities were available at a level that met the demand of farmers and growers. And if that were the case, the US could see benefits equivalent to around about 18% of total production based on 2017 levels. That's pretty remarkable. The report also looked at societal benefits. And these are things that we know we can already do with technology in New Zealand. So it found better connectivity could help reduce water usage by up to 50%, could reduce chemical usage by up to 80%, and could also mean people could trace a food product's journey really at the click of their fingers, which is also pretty amazing. So there's no question these types of benefits could relate to our agricultural industry also. And I think we've heard a great amount today thus far from Graham around rural broadband and the mobile black spots program, which is fantastic, and it's got huge benefits to tourists, visitors, and also people on farm and in rural communities. We wanted to talk a little bit about the Waikato, because that's where I'm from, and as Lisa has noticed, it is an agricultural powerhouse. There are some big agri-tech companies there, and some of these are big names with an international reach. Waikato Milking Systems, Gallagher Group, they are making inroads overseas, and their technology is extremely well known. I really wanted to focus on agri-tech because it's a real enabler for our farming communities. The use of technology can help with the other areas that we identified in our Slice of Heaven report, so tourism, food processing and advanced manufacturing. But agri-tech's a bit of a hidden ingredient. It's not hugely talked about. And if anyone's here from NZTE today, the video they launched at Field Days on the New Zealand agri-tech story is fantastic, and I'd encourage everyone here to check that out. Agri-tech, so it can help with connectivity, but it also helps with meeting to some of those regulatory requirements that I mentioned earlier, things that do make farmers' lives pretty difficult. It also helps them respond to market needs, consumer preferences, and reducing biological emissions, which Lisa has touched on. Technology and connectivity will really help farmers in rural communities meet these demands. The other point I'd probably make is that connectivity needs to be there to connect people as well. There's not a lot of point having great connectivity if people aren't on the land to use it. And if farming families are finding things too tough, and we know a lot of them are, the ability to realise those opportunities, both within the Waikato and in other parts of the country, will simply wither, I tend to think. And that actually has an impact on our ability to feed ourselves and our food security and our ability to feed the world. Because we're a great food producing nation, we can feed about 50 million people, which is pretty incredible. And that's probably a story we need to tell more. When I think back to where I grew up in Hauio, our local store closed in the mid-1980s, and the school I went to closed earlier this century. And that's not unusual. A lot of people in rural areas have seen their local services gradually close or fade away. And that's something that our American colleagues are working with right now with the US Department of Agriculture. So while technology might help with things like acreage reporting and traceability of products, they also know that technology can help to connect people to the land or attract people to the land. And that's because without technology, people are leaving because they think there are fewer opportunities. And I think the Minister touched on that before, that actually how connected an area is actually a big attractor in terms of finding quality staff and in terms of keeping people connected to their communities. It can make farming more attractive. And there was a quote that I liked from some interviews my colleagues did. Quote, "Agriculture technology will bring young people into agriculture and keep the industry alive. Kids need to step out of the city and get more involved with agriculture. We need engineers, lawyers, and mathematicians. Farming's a business too. There's a mentality that it's old McDonald," end quote. And I think that's probably something that persists here in New Zealand today. We need smart people on farm, and technology can be a big enabler of that. A piece of work Lisa and I did last year for Hort NZ looked at the challenges growers around Pukekohe are facing. One grower had been looking for a crop manager for 3 years, and the Pukekohe Vegetable Growers Association makes a huge effort to get out to schools, to career evenings, to help promote horticulture as a viable career. And maybe the application of technology is actually key to helping attract people to those farming careers. We've also touched on in today's presentations the benefits of telehealth to rural communities. And another one that our colleagues in the States have identified is around distance learning. But it can also open up other non-farm economic opportunities. And that's something I think is really important as well. So my aunt and two of my cousins who are on farm in Tahuna now have a non-farm business. They run largely over the internet. And that's because they can host webinars and engage with people in New Zealand and around the world as part of their business. That wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago, and it would have been really hard even 5 years ago. So that's something that connectivity can open up, and it can really help sustainability of rural communities. One last thing I wanted to touch on was our American colleagues are looking at the premiums people will pay for food that has a great backstory, food that's well raised and with great provenance. And I think it's really important to preserve New Zealand's ability to produce food and to enhance our food security. But I also think it's really important that we should be able to talk about how great our food production is here in New Zealand and what an enabler our agri-tech has been as part of that. We've got a pastoral-based free-range farming system that's completely different to most other places in the Northern Hemisphere. Over the last 30 years, emissions per kilo of milk and meat have trended steadily down. Greenhouse gas emissions per kilo of saleable product has dropped by about 40% for beef and lamb since 1990. And over the same period, since 1990, emissions per kilo of milk have dropped by about 1% year on year. These are really positive trends that ought to be applauded. And these drops are mostly due to agricultural science. And a lot of the science has been homegrown. And that's enabled farmers to access the technology to improve their herds through things like better feed management and greater control over things like the amount of fertiliser used. We've got a lot of inventions from local agri-tech that help farmers stay competitive while minimising their environmental footprint. And I think it's been great to see recently some really influential people coming out to talk about that. Nathan Penny, who's an ASB rural economist, did a fantastic column about this last week in the Herald. And our farmers have got a great track record of adopting new technology as it comes to hand. Our farmers aren't old MacDonald. They're actually incredibly forward-thinking. We forget that compared to other countries, compared to the US, where electric fencing is still a novelty out in the Midwest, and compared to the UK, where farming is often seen as far less commercial than in New Zealand, our rural people are really tech savvy. They are seen as commercially minded, they know how to turn a dollar, and they know the value of their land, and they know the value of what goes into their land, and the value of what comes out of their products. One grower I was talking to in California said that New Zealand agri-tech's a bit like inside baseball. You've really got to be in the know to understand it. We're not a big headline act like Israel or the Netherlands are when it comes to technology, but for those who are aware of agri-tech and our homegrown possibilities, we're seen as very high quality. So just to wrap up, connectivity, I think we all accept here, really helps rural and regional people succeed. I think that's a given. It's about the sustainability of our communities. But it has to be there to connect people. When I see the wall of regulations our farmers face and the other issues they're dealing with, from financing to business confidence, it's no wonder that people are leaving the land. But connectivity can help them stay there. I think that agri-tech, the greater use of agri-tech on our farms, which a lot of it depends on being connected, can attract people to imagining a future on the land, people who might not have considered that before. There's another gap that I think that technology and connectivity can bridge, and that's something I think is the urban and rural divide. At the moment, I think there's a bit of a gap that is widening. There seems to be a lack of understanding about what farmers need to do in order to survive. The vegetable growers we spoke to in Pukekohe last year talked a lot about people not understanding things like how weather impacted vegetable prices, for example. They're also grappling with city folk who are moving out to Pukekohe, buying up growing land, and then finding noisy machinery at peak harvesting time wasn't that nice, nor was fertiliser spreading during the daytime. You know, these add other pressures to their businesses. Likewise, livestock farmers, as Lisa has mentioned, they face persistent criticism around biological emissions, despite the fact for a number of decades now, technological advancement has really helped them to be able to tell a great story. I don't want to see the story of our low impact pastoral farming system being lost. And, it's really great to see our representative bodies for farmers like Federated Farmers having some great coverage, particularly in the last few days, around that great story that our farmers have to tell. So I'd like to see a lot more understanding of those stories. And I think that the story around technology and how it enables our farming communities has got a really big part to play in that. And I think if more people could see the benefits of that, could really help shift perceptions and instill greater pride in our innovative and forward-looking communities, which they are, and shifting perceptions around that is, I think, quite a key task. Thanks very much.